Electric vehicles in India are getting more popular by the month. However, when it comes to cars, they only occupy 1% of the overall market share. And the car next to me is what is expected to change all of that. The country's most affordable electric vehicle and the only EV to exist in the hatchback space at the moment, the Tata Tiago EV. Now, expectations from this car are extremely high, and the big question is, can the Tiago EV with its price performance proposition meet the requirement of an everyday affordable hatchback? Can it be just as practical, just as frugal, just as easy to maintain, and of course a lot more easy to own as the horde of hatchbacks that we have in the market? Expectations are high, and from the looks of it, at least on paper, the odds seem to be in the favor of the Tiago EV. However, let's take a closer look to find out if it's really just as good as it claims to be. Now, let's talk about the basics. You have two battery options, one being a 19 kilowatt hour one, which is the smallest in Tata's range, and the other being the 24 kilowatt hour one, which we also see in the Tigor EV. Most likely, and this is what Tata also suspects, the requests have been primarily for the larger battery option, which is the one we're testing today, the 24 kilowatt hour one. And the power figures in terms of BHP are roughly 75, which of course is fairly conservative when you think of it. But this car is an entirely mathematical proposition. We're very clear about the fact that it's not meant for highway use. In fact, you're immediately more conscious about losing range when you take a car of this size and proportion out on a big road where you will need to accelerate. And accelerate it can. That's a non-issue completely. Now, the interiors inside can be best described as pragmatic, functional, and neat. There are plenty of things to like in here and a few things that could be slightly better. Now, the things that I like, everything is very legible, everything is easy access. The screen, although a tad small, is still very functional, especially Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You just plug in the wire and it instantly connects it. There's no lag in the system. Even connecting Bluetooth is instantaneous, you know. It's much quicker than what I've seen in some really premium vehicles. As soon as you pair it, it just automatically is connected, and you know, you don't have to fiddle around too much. So to those of us who are familiar with the Nexon EV Max, you'll find certain elements that are familiar here. For example, the regen mode buttons, which are actually missing from the standard Nexon EV, but for an addition in the Nexon EV Max, and thankfully they've been put in here as well, and they are an extremely useful feature to have in a car like this. So there are 3 max modes for regenerative braking. You can increase it with this and decrease it all the way to no regenerative braking here. Charging outlet from this, unlock the car, unlock the boot. It's all fairly accessible. The overall level of quality here has, I would say, has gone up a little bit. I remember the Nexons of the past having slight crude edges, and while that's still there, I think the contouring and the finish around the steering can be better. That's only if you really take a closer look, but otherwise the leather wrapped steering is nicely cut. Everything feels relatively solid. Obviously, maintaining costs is a big factor for a car like this. In fact, it's one of its main attractions. So you can tell that Tata Motors has tried to do that. The use of plastic is pretty much the same you'd find in the Nexon EV. But it's clean, there's a lot of space, it's not imposing. The view is very good from up here. Yes, there is this bit of dead space around here where You constantly think that some sort of digital reading will pop out, but it never does. Plenty of storage space around here. There's obviously no wireless, charging dock or anything like that. It's fairly roomy, it's fairly nice. Another little gripe that I have is that when you're trying to adjust the steering, um, for just a rake of it alone, this is a bit hard. Like, you really gotta. So I would advise that you stop the car and don't do it on the run. Another little factor that I'm not too crazy about, but again, it's nowhere near a deal breaker. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of rotary knobs because they're not as tactile as like a physical lever. In this case, however, you've got 4 modes: reverse, neutral, drive, and sport. And while it's easy enough to switch through that, you will always have to keep an eye here, because in a brightly lit environment, you can't really tell which mode it is in just by rotating the knob alone. So you always have to just check there whether it's a neutral or drive. And I think it's a little niggle that can be very easily fixed, but it would be nice if they factored that in as well. When you go to driving behavior, it evaluates your overall driving inputs to create a driving score. Now, of course, there's no big prize that awaits the end of receiving a high score, but it does give you a good idea of just what kind of driving inputs will give you maximum range, will give you better efficiency, will overall improve the quality of your drive. It's actually quite detailed, as you can see. Everything from acceleration input, regeneration, safety, idling. That's another concern, because Tata Motors has said that idling will consume a bit of charge. So one has to be careful as to just how much is going in idling. So you can decide, in start-stop traffic, how much you want the car to idle, because you're not actually going to be reclaiming that much range with start-stop traffic as much you're going to be losing while idling. In addition to that, of course, there's all kinds of information that you're probably not really going to look at all that much, but it's handy knowing that such telematic data is out there. In addition to that, there's also an SOS function, and there are a lot of remote features that you can control with the car. You can control the aircon temperature, you can even control the horn, although I don't know why anyone would want to do that. Then of course, you can find out which charging stations are there, but since Tata already has a native app for that, the Tata Easy Charge app, they still recommend that one uses that to find out nearby charging stations rather than this. What this is good for is, yes, you get to run diagnosis, so you get to check the overall health of the battery, etc., everything. You also have emergency contacts, and based on the phone's accelerometer, in case you're in a crash, then through the app, the car will automatically inform your emergency contacts about what's happened. So, there is charge limit. You can apply speed limits to this car in case you want to sort of, drive conservatively, or you're giving it to someone and you want them to be a little careful. There's also a valet mode, which is actually something last I saw in a Range Rover. You can put a valet mode in there, which also controls the speed limit and the overall distance that can be covered in that time. So, nifty little app, and a really great addition considering the price point we're working in. Starting with the fact that, according to Tata, the overall monthly running cost for this car is about 1,500 rupees, as compared to the petrol counterpart, the Tiago Petrol, which is around 7,500 rupees. So the 6,500 that you do end up saving in monthly running costs, you can immediately put it down in your EMI, and that, I suspect, is going to be one of the main draws of this car. Now, Tata has made it very clear that this is not a highway car. It's a city car. It can be a second car. In fact, they even reserved a certain amount for existing Nexon EV owners EV Max owners particularly, who can have a highway car in the EV Max and a city car in this. And as far as city car requirements go, the Tiago EV is more than sufficient. Now, when we talk about sheer acceleration, yes, it's not gut punching in the way those slightly bigger battery pack endowed EVs are, but anytime you want it, it's still considerably better than any naturally aspirated small petrol engine somewhere around 1.2 liters can offer. It picks up speed very quickly. Your only concern is that it will lose charge relatively quickly, so you're not going to constantly be driving it flat out. But should you want overtaking power, it's there. That's not a concern. Now, the big challenge with a mass market electric hatchback is that its compact dimensions only allow a certain size when it comes to the battery pack. And that can mean that its range is either not sufficient and its power and performance don't really match what we've come to expect of EVs in modern times. Now, when it comes to range, according to my calculations, you can do about 180, and if you really drive conservatively with the intention of recuperating as much as possible, you can even possibly push it to 200. Freestyle driving expects something between 150 to 180 and not more than that. Do I have any gripes in the way it performs? I would really be nitpicking. This is really not a performance car. It corners really flatly, I have to say. But the steering, as with a lot of Tata cars, is very light. There's plenty of dead weight. There's almost very little in terms of feedback from the steering. That's pretty much the only niggle. Any underwhelming feeling that I was expecting from the battery is thankfully not the case. Not if you go into purchasing this car knowing fully well what your requirement is, which is practicality, frugality, with a bit of, performance thrown in. You don't have to do these mileage runs. You don't have to keep an eye on the speedometer on your commute just to see how much more fuel you've managed to extract on your daily commute. Yes, you will try and see how much you've managed to recover, and that's always fun, especially on a slope. And for that, I'm very thankful that they've included these regen modes, which I honestly don't see any reason to keep it in zero, because it just reduces your overall braking input. And I'm not saying, it can accommodate single pedal driving. Absolutely not. You will need to give that brake a bit of a squeeze every now and then, because there is, it is heavier than the petrol version. But that said, it does help in killing the momentum considerably. So for example, I'm doing exactly 60 at the moment, and I've taken my foot off the throttle completely. No input whatsoever. It's come to a complete standstill. Now, keeping this time frame in mind, once you get acclimatized to driving this car, your braking inputs will be vastly improved and reduced. You wouldn't really have to go in for that scary last minute squeeze because you've not completely calibrated your inputs around the weight of an EV. Now, the Tiago EV is, of course, the last of the cars to be based on Tata's Gen 1 Alpha architecture, which essentially retrofits an electric powertrain into an existing ICE chassis. It is supposed to be the last unless the Ultra's EV comes around. But as far as the fact that it's not a born electric chassis, when you take that into account, the dynamism of this car becomes even more impressive. you don't feel that bulk, you don't feel that weight sort of sloshing around when you abruptly brake this car. A lot of the weight related issues that come with larger EVs have been completely nullified here, and that makes it such a particularly fun to own, easy to drive city car. Anybody can just hop in. There's nothing intimidating about this car. The view is great, the ride height is just good enough to accommodate slightly large bumps. The suspension, for the most part, is quite supple. I did hope initially that it would be just a little more cushy, but after you drive along for a while, as soon as road surfaces tend to get just a little better, it's just fine. I honestly see very little in terms of compromise, because a lot of the weight related issues that come with larger crossover SUVs are not the case here. Even the Tigor EV with its boot has never been able to offer just this kind of peppiness, this sort of zestful performance. Well, I don't want to say zest, but you get the point. So there you have it. All you really need is a 15 amp charging socket to charge this car, which should be relatively easier to gain access to. Charging time comes down a little under 9 hours, about 8.7 for a full charge, and if you throw in a 7.2 kilowatt AC charger, then it's about 3.6 hours. Can this be the most dominant EV in the market? Can this be the most commonly cited electric vehicle? It certainly has all the makings, from what I've seen today, of a very practical but performative and yet easy to own, easy to run electric vehicle. It's too early to tell if it's going to sell in the same numbers as the Nexon EV, but from what I've seen so far, there's no reason for this to not be the most dominant and best-selling version of the Tiago.